Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Kimberly Packard, author of the Phoenix series. Kimberly, welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for having me.
Are you ready to get started?
Let's do this.
All right. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Oh, the first thing I would give them, whether they are a pantser or a plotter, is to know the end of their story before they even get started. I always tell people that writing a book is kind of like taking a road trip, a journey cross country. If you know you're trying to get to California, know you're trying to get to California. But if you're just like, I'm going to hop in the car and see where I end up, your book is going to be this is where I end up. So know where you're going.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I kind of joke that when I first wrote my very first book, my completed first novel, because we all have those, fits and starts, but the one I hit the end on, I thought that was the hardest part. And then I tried to go the traditional route. I did have a small publisher for the first print of it. So then I realized querying is the hardest part. And then I found a small publisher who's wonderful to work with. And then I realized, marketing is the hardest part. So really, I think, each step of the way is a challenge. They do get a little bit easier, but I think just don't ever get complacent because the marketplace is always changing. So just because what worked for book 1 may not work for book 10, maybe not even work for book 3. So I think that's the hardest part, is just kind of staying current on trends.
And then with your books, were they all traditionally published?
The first one was, I worked with a small indie publisher. And she actually pulled back and started only doing nonfiction. So she gave me my rights back. And that's when I took a class on self-publishing, and I realized, I can actually do this. This isn't that hard. There's a lot more tools out there for authors, especially, indie or the self-publish is, what they sometimes call us, than ever before. And I had just so much fun doing it. I never thought I would.
Well, this will transition nicely into our next question, and that is about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that worked well.
The thing that worked the best for me is really trying to get a connection with readers and not do the buy my book, buy my book, buy my book, because the readers, obviously they'll fall in love with your story and fall in love with your characters, and the characters are, in a way, an extension of yourself. But have a newsletter, be consistent with your newsletter, be real with your newsletter. Actually, if you sign up for my newsletter, I've got the little autoresponders like, hey, thanks for this. And, and I kind of have a little fun with it. And I, give a picture of my cat because my cat is really strange. And I've had people respond to that saying, okay, this is great. This is a great autoresponder. So don't be afraid to be yourself, and, you don't have to be author Kim or, author self. You could just be your real self and connect. People want to know who's behind those words. The other thing that I've done that's been really great is to try to get out there as much as you can. Go to local book signings, travel if you can a little bit, and just meet people. And even if they don't buy your book that day, just be gracious and say thank you and make that connection, because you never know, they may hop on Amazon and read up the reviews and learn more about you that way.
You make a lot of great points. I think it's one of the biggest things is having the authentic connection with readers versus just buy my book, giving them value and giving them something for free. That's one thing I always like to do is for my readers, I always send out something. I did a second edition of one of my books a couple of weeks ago, and I just made that exclusive to my readers, sent it to them, and they just loved it.
Well, and one thing I think I'm going to start doing, so I do have, I have a Phoenix series as a trilogy, but the books I have coming up after that are going to all be standalones. But I have a short story that's a prequel to the Phoenix series that's actually going to be an anthology that's coming out this spring. And once it's published, I get it back. I can use it as a I'm totally blanking on that. The lead magnet. But the other thing I think I may even start doing is making, I love short stories, writing some flash fiction, writing some short stories that are just my voice and may not have anything to do with any of my other stories, but just like, hey, thanks for signing up. Here's a free 10-page short story you might enjoy. Because I think there is something to that. It's just giving them something, and you really don't have to give me anything more than your email address.
Well, and the other thing too is posting consistently, at least.
Yeah.
And the expectation is at least once a week, but even if you just do 2 to 3 times a month, just keeping that connection versus just sending out an email right before you're about to launch a book. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I admit I'm a monthly girl on my newsletter, mostly because sometimes I feel like, oh gosh, they're going to get tired of me. I'm a complete dork, and a lot of times I have just the most random things in my head, and but what I do is I use Twitter, I use Facebook, I use Instagram. I love Instagram. Instagram's great for connecting with readers. There's some really great hashtags to follow out there that you can, if you use those hashtags, connect with readers that way. And it's just, it's all about being consistent, like you said.
Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Now, Paul, you're asking me to pick my favorite child, and it's not fair.
I know.
I think it's funny because, like I said, I'm going to answer it in a non-answer sort of way. I think there's a book for every moment in your life. The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein will still make me cry. And my 7-year-old niece and nephew look at me with the funniest look on my face, like, why is this adult crying in this book? But it's definitely, the message is always so appropriate there. I love David Mitchell. He's an Irish writer. And one of my, I think his probably has to be up there as one of my favorite books. It's called The Cloud Atlas. It was actually made into a movie. I think Tom Hanks was in it. What I love about that book was the structure of the narrative. It was this grand, story that spanned centuries. And in some cases, he wouldn't even finish a sentence. He would finish a chapter mid-sentence. And then as that story arced back into place, he would pick it back up. And so what I loved about that was that story is he was able to tie all these characters and all these storylines together with a single thread that was actually not that hard to pick up. As a reader, I found it fairly easily. And then he wasn't afraid to play with story structure because, these are words, these are stories, these are characters. You can have fun with it. You can play with it. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. You can just delete it and start over and try something new. But I think that book gave me permission to have fun and play.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
I am partial to the quote, well-behaved women rarely make history. I forget who I've seen it attributed to half a dozen people. But what I love about that in a couple of different ways, most of my protagonists are female. And I think that gives me permission to write strong female characters. I guess I could turn it around and say, well-behaved characters rarely make a good story. You have to be unafraid to let them misbehave in a bit, but also let them be strong enough to stand up to whatever the challenge they're facing. And then as a writer, I think well-behaved people rarely make history. Don't be afraid to get out there and try something and push yourself out there. And yes, you may fail, but you might also succeed.
Well, Kimberly, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
The best way to find me, I have a website, KimberlyPackard.com. On that website, you can sign up for my newsletter. You can follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, Instagram. All of those are at Kimberly Packard. I always joke, just follow me on social media. If you try to follow me in person, you will realize I'll walk into a room and forget why way too often.
Well, Kimberly, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate it.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.